Hi everyone, Sean Stewart here at Stewart & Co. Real Estate for another episode of Sunsea and Second Homes. Today I'm recording in an actual recording studio, very businesslike, and we're going to be speaking to a longtime friend and colleague of mine, Cliff Gardiner, who is based in central London, and in his capacity as a buying agent with over 30 years experience, we're going to get some insight into the prime central London property market, and we're going to touch on Barbados and property as well. So lots to share, lots to talk about. Can't wait to share it all with you. Let's get cracking.
Cliff, thank you very much for joining me here on Sunsea and Second Homes. I'm going to introduce you very quickly. Cliff Gardiner, the founder of CGP, also known as Cliff Gardiner Properties in central London. I've known Cliff for over 2 decades. He is, in my mind and in many people's minds, one of the preeminent buying agents in prime central London. And I'm very fortunate to have him as a guest today. And we're going to discuss various aspects of Barbados and prime central London property. Cliff, welcome. Tell me a little bit about what you've been up to and maybe a little bit of a history about yourself so that people can get some perspective.
Yeah, hey Sean. I've been an estate agent in central London for, I guess, over 30 years now. I started in 1989, and I started as a regular estate agent selling houses, and then 23 years ago went from poacher into gamekeeper and became a buying agent. So now I just exclusively work for buyers. I don't sell any properties to anybody, but I run around after international buyers who want access to off-market properties and the best properties in central London, and that's exclusively what I do. I've been doing that, as I say, for over 20 years now, and I set up on my own. I run my own business, CGP, as you mentioned. I started that in 2012, so I've been an independent buying agent for 13 years now, I guess.
Okay, and I mean, I've witnessed the vast majority of your career, and far from you running after buyers, buyers are running after you, so you've been very modest there. I know that you are sought after as a buying agent by high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals, the names of which you will never tell me, and that's, you know, I can understand that. What are you seeing the London market as at the moment? What sort of state is it in from your perspective?
Well, I think London is fascinating as a property market to international buyers. It always has been, and obviously people have seen what's happened with this new government that we've got. They've seen changes in taxation regimes, and people are worried. You know, they're not sure whether this is the right time to put their money in London. So they appreciate talking to someone like me who will give it to them straight and tell them how it is. I'm completely honest and opaque. You know, I'm not desperate for that next sale next week. So I will give advice that, you know, looks after their best interests. So I think people like me and people who do what I do are becoming more and more sought after in London, because people want to know how it really is, not just what they read in the newspapers, which can be very misleading.
Indeed. And to be clear, a buyer will retain you. You are paid by the buyer, they're your client, and you act in their best interest. Is that right?
Yeah. It's very important that they agree to work with me exclusively. So they become my client. They pay me a retaining fee. It's a couple of £1,000s. They sign a contract. We agree to work together exclusively, so that when I go out into the market, you know, this is my client I'm looking out for, and there's not 3 other agents all doing the same thing. And it means I'm more likely to get access to properties that aren't in the open market, and people are more likely to do me a favor in approaching a seller if they know the client is exclusively with me and they are benefiting from my advice.
And those buyers are clearly motivated if they're going to be paying money to someone to help them to find a property. So they're pre-qualified way more than other buyers who may just be kicking tires.
Yeah, I think what selling agents appreciate is that they know that a Cliff Gardiner property client is going to get good advice. They're going to be led in the right direction. They're going to be well briefed. They're going to have access to good lawyers, good surveyors, the background team. Yes. So they are more likely to see a transaction through from start to finish because they know what they're buying right from the outset. and they haven't been misled into a expensive property purchase that they may regret agreeing to. So, we tend to get the deals through once we get terms agreed.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. You built a career advising high net worth and ultra high net worth clients in prime central London. What are the hallmarks of these buyers, and how do they differ from more traditional purchasers?
Well, I think the clients that I've been lucky enough to work with, they're sort of world people, if you know what I mean. They've got properties all around the world. They've got great lawyers, great bankers. Their team is usually, very well put together. But they have limited time. They appreciate that when they're in London, for example, they don't want to have any of their time wasted. They want to get into the best that they can see in that limited period when they're in London. So
yes.
What they like about working with, and they're used to paying for advice, Sean, that's the key. They pay a lawyer for their advice. They pay a banker for their advice. And they're used to paying somebody for the benefit of their experience and for the convenience of getting 30 years of market knowledge in a very concise, very quick manner. I can tell them how it is, how the market is, and when I tell them that they're looking at the best of the best, they take that as a fact. It's not just some selling agent trying to sell them something.
Yes.
So that's the crux of it.
And with over 3 decades, you mentioned, 30 years, with over 3 decades in the industry, what are the most important lessons you've learned about successfully representing buyers at the top end of the market?
Well, I think ultimately, if you don't believe it's the right property for them, then you have to tell them. Many times I've had clients find something on the internet and they send it to me and they say, Cliff, I've seen a great property. Can I have your opinion on it? Do you think I should buy it? And, I say no more often than I say yes. Okay. Because when you've been working in the industry in prime central London for over 30 years, you've seen a lot of property.
Yes.
Okay? You know what the best of the best looks like. And if we're, in the recent market, there's not a lot of sellers in the open market now. They don't want their property exposed to advertising and marketing. So they keep things off market and quietly in the sort of bottom drawers of estate agents. And so, what you're seeing on Rightmove and the property portals in London is not truly representative of what you can buy in London. And I think, that's what my clients appreciate, that, when I say something's good, they know I'm working on their behalf. They know I'm working in their best interests. I'm not being paid by the seller of a property to promote it perhaps harder than it merits.
Can you walk me through your approach when working with a new client, from the initial consultation to sourcing, negotiating, and completion?
Yeah, I guess it very often depends on where the client is in their knowledge of London. If I've got a client who knows their way around, they've perhaps bought properties in London before, they kind of know what they're looking for, it's a lot easier. They just want me to get them into the best properties quickly. If a client is lacking in that knowledge, then I will take them through an educational process over a matter of time that they're in London. So I'll be showing them, the brief will be wide open. I'll be showing them all sorts of different houses in all sorts of different postcodes, just so they can build up their knowledge and understand why certain things fetch bigger prices than other things do. And it's that education process, again, not selling them anything, helping them understand the market in which they're buying in. And that process can take 6 weeks, it can take 6 months, it can take a lot longer, and at times.
Yes.
But I'll give you an example, Sean. Just recently I had a client come to London who was very, very specific. There was a terrace of houses in Chelsea and she said, I want one of those. And there was nothing on the open market. And it was a matter of knocking on doors, literally knocking on doors, to ask if people wanted to sell these properties, and then presenting her with, there were 20 houses I could have approached. We got into 5 of them, just literally by trawling through my contacts, knocking on doors.
These are properties not being marketed. This is literally just contacts of yours that you've gone through to see if there's even a chance that they would be willing to sell.
Yeah, and this client would never have been able to get that access on her own.
Right.
She doesn't have these contacts. She doesn't have that knowledge and that experience. She wouldn't have the gumption to go and knock on a door.
Of course.
So that's an example of how a very, very specific search that can happen a lot quicker, if I'm lucky, But sometimes it takes months and months and months and lots of different visits to London for someone to build up their knowledge, to give them the confidence to make what is a massive decision.
Yeah, yeah. And on the negotiating side, obviously you then liaise with the agent if the property is on the market. In a situation that you just described, how do the dynamics work? You're acting on behalf of the buyer. Does the seller get representation to so that they're not dealing directly with you, or do you deal directly with them? How do they feel about negotiating with an expert, you, when maybe they're not an expert?
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, a seller will have their own agent, and I work with my clients. So there's two separate negotiating parties there. But very often, my job is to lead the seller's agent into advising his client to my way of thinking. So I will very often, if we identify a property that I want to buy, I'll sit down with my client and I'll say, look, if it's 15 million, it's a good deal. If we have to pay 17, it's not bad. 20 million's too much. Right. We'll go into a negotiation on that basis. I will then do my damnedest to convince the seller's agent that 15 is the right price. And I'll provide evidence and comparables of other houses that have sold to back up my case. And very often I'll put a document together for them and say, look, pass this on to your client so your client can see the facts that I'm working with. And if you've got other facts that you think disprove my way of thinking, then I'd love to see them. So I will help the selling agent advise his client. Yeah, but most importantly, obviously, the interests of my client are paramount.
And if that property isn't on the market and therefore the seller doesn't have an agent per se, then what happens?
Well, then it's just a matter of, assessing the price that the seller wants. I think off market is often it's a dangerous area because sometimes sellers are completely unrealistic with their expectations and completely not in tune with the market. They haven't had the benefit of 6 months of perhaps 3 viewings a month and no offers to dampen down their expectations and to make them more realistic. So very much, off-market properties can be more expensive than on-market properties. But in the case of my client saying, I want one of those, it was very much like, of the 20 houses, here's 5 you can buy. Here are the prices they all want. This is the one that's most suitable. If we could get it for this price, it would be a good deal. And then we just try and negotiate with the seller. Again, we help them understand the market. We provide comparable evidence. We back up our bid. We don't want any sellers thinking we're being cheeky or being rude or trying to offend them. But we do work on the basis of factual evidence of market sales in the past.
When the property isn't on the market, who represents the seller, or how does that affect the negotiation?
Yeah, and I think in that case, it's up to me to convince the seller that the price that we want to pay is the price he should be accepting, and whether he's got an agent advising him or not, I will help him make a decision or them make a decision by providing them with factual evidence of other sales that I'm using as the basis for my negotiation. I don't want to be seen as somebody who's trying to undercut people or buy properties too cheaply. We'll pay the market price, and very often we'll pay a premium for the right property. But I sometimes need to help the seller understand, where the market really is without him having had the benefit of 6 months of exposure and no interest or lack of viewings or no offers, which can often help me as a buying agent bring the price down.
That's fair enough. Much of your business comes from referrals and repeat clients. What do you think makes your approach stand out in such a competitive market? There are lots of buying agents in London.
Yeah, I think it's about being effective. I'm lucky enough to get recommended quite a bit, and I don't take that for granted. It's how my business grows, but it's because I've been effective and I've been tenacious and I've just got stuff done. So that when my clients come to London, often for a very limited period of time, I will drop everything. I will give up all of the time in my diary while they're here, spend every day with them, showing them different properties, helping them understand the market, talking about local areas, giving them the facts and the information until they leave, so that they leave ready to make a decision. So I think, how do I stand out from the market? My track record, my tenacity, my enthusiasm for the job. I love what I do. I never get bored
Yes.
of looking at houses. And also I'm honest. I've got a bit of grey hair. I've been around the block a little bit. I can give them advice based on real-time knowledge of what actually has happened in London, on the basis of houses that I've seen and houses that I've seen selling.
And that's a big part of it, right? Is it's honesty and building trust and credibility. I mean, that surely that work both for buying agents and for estate agents. It really comes down to the seller or the buyer or both being able to trust the source of information, and whether that be an agent or a selling agent.
Yeah, and I think you can only get that from being in your market for a long period of time.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of £15 million houses. I've seen a lot of £30 million houses over the years, and I've seen which ones sell and which ones don't sell, which ones achieve a premium and which ones just take forever. So I know what makes a great property. And what I do, it is about exceptional properties. It's not about your run-of-the-mill 20 houses in a terrace of houses all the same. It's about finding those exceptional, unique, one-off opportunities. A lot of my track record are penthouses and first floor flats. That's no accident. Those are the best flats in the building. But it's about those great houses, mid-terrace houses or special one-off houses. And when you've got access to that type of market, your clients really appreciate it.
Fair. I mean, what makes a property prime in London, and how do you define value in a market where the best homes are often off market?
Well, I think it's a really easy way of looking at that. With houses, there are only a really limited number of very special houses in central London. We have a long terraces where all the houses are the same, pretty much. The only differentiation is the kitchen or the bathrooms. I think some of these 6-star developments that we're seeing in London, there might be 300 or 400 flats. So it's very difficult to stand out from that crowd. There's a lot of what we call commoditized property. Property that you see week in, week out throughout the year. These are not difficult properties to find. There's always a few examples in the open market, on the portals, Rightmove, on the market, Zoopla. They're easy to find. There's always plenty for sale. What we're looking for is things that are special, things that are unique, that are exceptional in some way.
What are the main challenges high net worth buyers face when acquiring property in London, and how do you help them navigate those?
I think oftentimes it's confidence. If you read the newspapers and read the press, I don't think you'd ever really buy a property, or certainly not in the last 10, 15 years. The press have painted a very gloomy portrait of what's going on in the economy and what's going on in the housing market. But the prime London market just operates in its own bubble. It's not the same as the housing market in Leeds, or it's not the same as the housing market in Liverpool or Manchester or other places in the UK. London's a very small area, or certainly the areas that you want to live in London are very small areas with very limited selections of properties. And it's helping people understand that these properties hold their value. They outperform the general market. They're harder to find. People hold on to them for longer, and they're more difficult to buy. So it's about helping people to understand that the uniqueness of certain properties, or why they fetch a premium price, and whether it's worth paying a premium price for certain properties. And again, that's a price. It would take you 20, 30 years just to build up that knowledge yourself, when you can employ someone like me who's been there, seen it, done it, and can give you that advice in bite-sized chunks very quickly.
Absolutely. It's the local know-how, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it's the same in Barbados.
Precisely. Absolutely. And as you mentioned, Barbados, just making a connection, you visited Barbados and you have some idea of the West Coast. From your perspective, what aspects of the island would resonate most with your London clients?
I think my clients, or typical London clients, recognize quality when they see it. They recognize something that's special. And from what I've seen on some of the properties that I've been lucky enough to see with you, or just on my travels around Barbados in generally, there are certain properties that just make your heart sing, that you just think, wow, this is special. The plot, the outlook, the access to the beach, whatever it might be.
Yes.
The security on offer, the quality of the build, the architecture. There are certain things. I mean, I go and look at a lot of properties, Sean. I'm out every day looking at properties, and 1 in 30 might make my heart sing.
Yes.
That might give me a good reason to phone a client. There's a lot of dross out there, and I'm dismissing 90% of the things that I see, and just looking for that 10% or even that 5%, the top echelon. Right. And in Barbados, particularly on the west coast, I mean, some of those coastal properties are just wonderful.
Yes, yeah, and the same rules would apply. It's you're going to see it, and it will do something to you, and it will do something to the buyer.
Yeah.
It will say something to them. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you see parallels between what defines prime in London and what feels prime in Barbados? Do you see synergies there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Barbados isn't a huge island, but then there are certain spots of the island that you really want to be if you're spending, serious money. So it's a limited market. There's very few opportunities, and you need good advisors on hand, local advisors, to help you gain access to these properties. People hold on to them long term. They don't sell them, every year. So those are the parallels, really. I mean, if it was easy to buy a great property on the west coast in Barbados, people just wouldn't need people like you. Okay, but it's not easy.
Yeah, this is true. Your clients are often globally mobile and own multiple homes. How do you see Barbados fitting into an international portfolio alongside London?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, there are certain demographics of clients where, my clients from the Middle East, for example, aren't looking for somewhere else sunny to go on holiday. Right. They do their best to avoid the sun,
Yes.
So I guess it's a certain demographic. Certainly European buyers would see the Caribbean and Barbados as an absolute dream destination. So,
yes.
And certainly clients from America and Canada, same rules apply. Access to that boating life, sport on the water, great beaches, great hotels, great amenities, great restaurants.
There's going to be some geography that's going to be a factor. There's going to be cultural factors, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, definitely. But Barbados has enough quality about it. The golf courses, the restaurants, the amenities to attract anyone from looking for a sunny boat hole, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Cliff, how would you describe the west coast of Barbados to someone who's only ever known London?
Well, I mean, I've had some wonderful times over there, on that side of the island, Sean, as you know, and it is. At times relaxing, but also there's plenty to do. There's plenty of action. There's some great cafes and restaurants. There's some great shopping. There's some great hotels, golf courses. Yeah, there's so much to do in Barbados, and the climate just for us Brits is absolutely perfect most of the time.
Cliff, I mean, really interesting to get your insight and views. What do you see the London property market doing? What sort of state is it in? How do you feel about it in prime central London?
Well, I mean, if anything, if the last 3 months are anything to go by, then a lot of my clients are coming out of the woodwork. They can only really wait so long. If they want to do something in London, reading all this, all the news in the press is enough to put anybody off. But what I'm seeing now is a very, very receptive marketplace. It's really a buyer's market. It might seem risky, with global geopolitics and all the things going on with taxation with the Labour government here in the UK. But I don't think there's going to be a better time to buy than now for a long, long time. Sellers are receptive. Sellers, have seen pain. They've seen a lot of inactivity on their properties that are on the market, and they're listening to sensible bids now. And I can get into off-market properties again with sensible sellers at sensible prices. So, I think I'm pretty optimistic about the rest of this year. What will happen in 26? Hopefully we'll be more settled in terms of what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Ukraine, and all the other factors that influence people's confidence to spend money. I think London's always been seen as a safe haven, a great place to educate your kids.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting the point you make about sellers being receptive, and the reason I say that. And you and I worked alongside each other in central London for a long time. And we have both experienced spells where there's, to a certain extent, a bit of a standoff between seller and buyer because of the demographic and the area in which we both worked and you still work. You had sellers who aren't at the mercy of a mortgage. And you have buyers who are educated enough about buying that they're not going to go and spend money just because they think that's what the price should be. So you have two educated, normally strong-willed opposing forces, and it can often end up with no transaction happening because neither side wishes to budge. I've gone through that. I'm sure you have. It's not like other parts of the UK where the economy starts to get tough and an owner will say, okay, we need to drop the price because we need to sell. It's not that market. And are you seeing a difference at the moment as far as sellers being a little bit more, as you said, receptive, malleable, and open to offers?
Yeah, I hear you on this discretionary seller, and buyers that are a little bit wary, and sometimes that gap's difficult to bridge. But what I've seen in the last 6 months to a year is that, sellers are listening to well-qualified offers.
Right.
And, my job is to give my buyers confidence, or my clients confidence, that, now's not a bad time to buy,
Yeah.
So, again, if I put my report together for my client now and say, look, in this range, it's a good buy. If we have to pay this, it's a premium, it's worth paying, or it's not worth paying. Sellers are coming to the table now. They're listening. I'm not there to buy properties cheaply or to scam people into selling their properties for less than they're worth.
Right.
I'll pay a premium for a premium property.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. But sometimes, sellers, went through that phase you were referring to, of being completely unrealistic and misled by selling agents desperate for stock.
Yes. Yeah.
And so they were getting bad advice their end. So you couldn't exactly say it was all their fault. Selling agents.
And that makes it tough for you as a buying agent, I'm sure.
Yeah, but you don't win every argument, but some you do, and the ones you do for the right properties are the transactions you put in the books. So, I'm just saying, recent success, and I'm having a good year this year. We've won the battle more often than we've lost it.
Fair enough. Cliff, if someone will get a hold of you, they've listened to you. I listen to you often. You've always got good words of advice, good sage words of advice. If someone wanted to reach you, how do they do that? What's your website address? What are your contact details?
Yeah, the best one is cliffgardiner.com. That's an easy one to remember. Gardiner with an I. Gardiner.
I can remember that.
Cliffgardiner.com. All my information's on there. You can drop me an email and we can have a chat. As I say, I'm not going to ram a property down your throat, but I can tell you how the market is here. And if you want to spend some time looking at some properties in London, get in touch.
Fair enough. I would much rather have done this over a rum punch here in Barbados, or even over a pint in London. But sadly, we are thousands of miles apart. Really good to see you anyway. Thank you so much for taking the time, Cliff. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to catching up with you in person very soon.
Great to speak with you as always, Sean. You take care
now. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.